The call came in at 1:47 in the morning, and by the time the trauma bay doors slammed open, the man on the gurney had already coded twice in the ambulance. Blunt force to the chest, possible aortic injury, BPs in the basement, 60/40 and dropping. The paramedic rattled it off without slowing down, hands still pressing the manual bag over the patient's face. He was pinned under a steel beam at the Harwick construction site for 11 minutes before they got him out. The night shift at Callaway Regional Medical Center was not built for this. There were 3 nurses on the floor. A second-year resident who had never managed a level 1 trauma alone. And somewhere in the building, supposedly on call, was Dr. Fletcher Crane, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, the man whose name was on the wall of the East Wing, whose photograph smiled down from the lobby like a benediction. Nobody could find him. Page Crane again. The charge nurse, a broad-shouldered man named Keith, was already moving, already pulling equipment, and get me someone from surgery. Anyone. Standing at the back of the bay, almost against this wall, was a woman the night staff barely noticed most shifts. Sable, 29 years old. Her badge said Patient Care Technician, Float Pool, which was one of the lowest rungs on the hospital ladder. The people who took vitals, changed linens, wheeled patients to imaging. She had worked the float pool at Callaway for 8 months. She was quiet. She was efficient. She stayed out of the way and did exactly what she was told and never volunteered an opinion about anything. She was watching the monitor. The waveform on the screen was wrong in a very specific way. Not just low pressure, the shape of it, the dampened, paradoxical pulse pressure, the way it climbed and fell with the patient's breathing when it should not have. She knew what that meant. She had seen it in a place and a time she did not talk about, in a field hospital in a valley that didn't appear on any civilian map, under a sky full of smoke. She said nothing, not yet. Chest x-rays back. The resident, whose name was Dr. Pruitt, young, sweating, trying very hard to hold it together, slapped the image onto the light board. Widened mediastinum. Could be a great vessel injury. Could be, Keith said, and the 2 words carried every ounce of dread they were supposed to. Where was Crane? His answering service said he had checked in 2 hours ago. His cell went straight to voicemail. Someone was sent to the doctor's lounge, the parking garage, the call room on the 3rd floor. The patient's name was Martin Aldridge, 51 years old. Father of 2. The construction company ID clipped to his jacket said he'd been a site foreman for 22 years. His hands, even slack and gray against the gurney, were the hands of someone who had built things his whole life. Thick-knuckled, scarred, capable. He was not supposed to die at 1:47 in the morning in a trauma bay, while the surgeon responsible for his life was unreachable. His pressure dropped again. 55/30. He's losing volume faster than we can replace it, Pruitt said, and his voice cracked on the last word. If this is a descending aortic tear, then he needs a surgeon, Keith said. Not us. Sable had moved, without anyone asking her to the head of the gurney. She was checking the IV lines, adjusting the flow rate, her hands methodical and certain. Pruitt noticed and started to say something about it. A PCT wasn't supposed to be managing IV access, and then he looked at her face and stopped. Her face was completely calm, not the brittle calm of someone suppressing panic. The real kind. The kind that comes from having stood in rooms like this before, rooms where everything was wrong and loud and bleeding, and having found the still point in the center of it. His neck veins, she said quietly. Look at them. Pruitt looked. The jugular veins were distended, visibly, abnormally full, standing out against Martin Aldridge's neck like cables. Beck's triad, she said. Low pressure, distended neck veins, muffled heart sounds. Pruitt finished it, his face going pale. He grabbed his stethoscope, listened. His eyes closed for a moment. Oh God, he's tamponating. Cardiac tamponade. Blood in the pericardial sac, compressing the heart from the outside, squeezing it until it couldn't fill, couldn't pump, couldn't keep a man alive. It could kill in minutes. The treatment was a needle, a long needle, inserted at a very precise angle, into a very precise location, draining the blood from around the heart, or a scalpel. I can't do a pericardiocentesis alone, Pruitt said. I've done it twice in simulation, never on a live patient. I need an attending. The monitor alarmed. Heart rate crashing. 60, 52, 48. Someone in the hallway was shouting that Dr. Crane had been located. He was 20 minutes away. 20 minutes. Sable Wen pulled on a pair of gloves. "I can do it," she said. The room went very still in the way rooms do. When something has been said that doesn't fit the shape of the world, everyone in that room has agreed to live in. Keith stared at her. "You're a patient care tech." "I know what I am," she said. She was already moving to the supply cart, already knowing exactly which drawer, already pulling the kit with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done this in worse conditions than a well-lit trauma bay. His pressure is 40 over nothing. "You don't have 20 minutes. You don't have 10. Sable." Pruitt's voice was low, warning. "What are you doing? What someone needs to do?" She looked at him directly. "You can stop me. That's your right. But you need to make that decision right now, because he doesn't have time for us to have this conversation." The monitor screamed. Martin Aldridge's heart rate hit 38. Pruitt looked at the monitor, looked at Sable, looked at the door where no surgeon was coming. "Tell me what you need," he said. She was already telling him. Her hands didn't shake. That was the thing Keith would remember later. That was the thing Pruitt would describe to his attending the next morning in a voice that still wasn't quite steady. Her hands did not shake. She positioned the needle at the subxiphoid angle, the approach from below the sternum, angled toward the left shoulder at exactly the right degree, and she spoke as she worked in a low, even voice that was partly for Pruitt and partly, perhaps, just habit. Negative pressure on the syringe the entire time. "If I'm in the right place, we'll see blood return that doesn't clot. It's already been defibrinated in the pericardial space." The needle advanced, the syringe filled with dark, non-clotting blood. Martin Aldridge's blood pressure, on the monitor, began, slowly, then all at once, to climb. 70 over 40, 80 over 50, 90 over 60. His heart rate steadied. 58, 65, 72. The room exhaled. Keith was standing with his hand pressed flat against the wall, and he didn't remember putting it there. Pruitt had both hands on the edge of the gurney, like he needed something solid to hold on to. The paramedic who had brought Martin in and had stayed, for reasons he couldn't have explained, was standing in the doorway with his mouth open. Sable withdrew the needle with the same precision she'd used to place it. She set it in the sharps container. She stripped off one glove, checked Martin's pulse at the wrist. Steady, stronger now. And then she looked up. Dr. Fletcher Crane was standing in the doorway. He had made it in 14 minutes, not 20. He was still in the clothes he'd apparently been wearing when he was reached. Not call room clothes, not surgical scrubs, but a dress shirt with the top 2 buttons undone and a sport coat that smelled, if you were close enough, faintly of bourbon. He took in the room, the monitor, the patient, the needle kit on the tray. The glove Sable had set aside. His eyes found her. "What?" he said very carefully. "Did you do?" It wasn't a question, not really. His voice had the texture of someone building something unpleasant very deliberately. "Pericardiocentesis," she said. He was in tamponade. His pressure was in the 30s. "You are a patient care technician." He had 4 minutes, maybe. "You were 14 away." Crane's jaw worked. He walked to the monitor, to the patient, ran his eyes over the vitals with the practiced speed of a man who had been doing this for 30 years. Martin Aldridge's numbers were not perfect, but they were survivable. He would need surgery. Proper surgery, in an R, for the underlying vessel injury. But he was alive to receive it. Crane knew that. He could see it plainly, and it seemed to make him angrier rather than less. "You performed an invasive procedure without authorization, without credentials, without—" "I performed it correctly," Sable said. "That is not the point. It's the only point that matters to him." She nodded toward Martin. Something shifted in Crane's face. Not softening, nothing so simple, more like a door closing. He turned to Pruitt. "You allowed this?" Pruitt met his eyes steadily, which took more courage than the question made it look like. "I made a judgment call in an emergency, sir. The patient was coding." "We will discuss your judgment," Crane said, and turned back to Sable. "And yours. Tonight, after I've stabilized this patient, I will be calling administration and I will be calling the board. I don't care what your reasons were. You don't get to decide that rules don't apply to you because you feel like the situation warrants it." Sable said nothing. She began preparing the bay for transport to the R because that was what Martin Aldridge needed next, and someone had to do it. Crane watched her for a moment with an expression that might have bane something other than anger if he'd let it be. Then he turned away and began doing his job. The OR team was assembled in 11 minutes. Martin Aldridge was on the table in 14. Dr. Crane, who was a great many things that were not admirable, was also a genuinely skilled surgeon. And the repair he performed on the descending thoracic vessel injury was textbook. Precise, efficient, the kind of work that justified the name on the east wing wall, even if the man himself sometimes did not. Martin Aldridge survived. In the hallway outside the OR, around 4 a.m, Keith found Sable sitting on a bench with a paper cup of coffee she hadn't drunk yet. She was looking at the floor. Not distressed, exactly, just somewhere else for a moment. He sat down next to her. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. She looked at the coffee. "A long time ago." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He waited. "I was in the army," she said finally, "medical corps, and then something else after that. For a while, in places I can't tell you about." She paused. "I got out 4 years ago. The licensing process for physicians, reestablishing credentials, the paperwork, the boards. When you've been doing classified work for 6 years and you can't explain half your training record, it's not simple." Keith was quiet for a moment. "So you have a medical degree?" "I have 2, she said, and there was no pride in it, just fact. One in emergency medicine, one in surgery, neither of which Callaway Regional knows about, because I'm still working through the credentialing, and in the meantime I needed income, and the float pool was hiring." He stared at her. "A float pool PCT," he said. "It pays the bills." "Sable, I know." She finally picked up the coffee. "I know how it looks. Crane is going to come after you. I know that too." She didn't sound afraid. She sounded tired, in the specific way of someone who has been tired for a long time and has learned to carry it without showing. The administrative meeting happened at 9 that morning, which gave Fletcher Crane time to scrub out, debrief his team, change his clothes, and arrive in the conference room on the 6th floor, looking like the kind of man who ran things. Which, at Callaway Regional, he largely did. Across the table sat Sable Wen, who had not gone home, who had continued her shift until 7, and then changed out of her scrubs in the locker room and come upstairs in the same jeans and blouse she'd arrived in. Because she didn't own a suit, or if she did, it was in a box in a storage unit she hadn't opened since she moved here. Between them sat the hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Adaeze Obi, who had been in this job for 6 years and had seen a great many things in conference rooms on the 6th floor, but who listened to the account of the previous night with an expression that gave nothing away until she was ready for it to. Also present, the head of HR, a man named Glendon, who took very careful notes, a union representative for the nursing staff, because Keith had insisted, and Dr. Pruitt, who had not slept and looked it. Crane presented his case efficiently. Unauthorized invasive procedure. Gross violation of scope of practice. Patient safety concerns, though he phrased this carefully, in the way of a man who knows that the patient in question did not, in fact, come to harm from the procedure, and who is working around that fact rather than through it. License liability. Institutional reputation. When should be immediately terminated, he concluded, and referred to the State Medical Board for investigation. Dr. Obi looked at Sable. "Would you like to respond?" "Yes," Sable said. She spoke for 4 minutes. She described the clinical presentation, the exact triad, the timeline, the pressure readings, the decision tree. She described why the procedure was indicated, why the window was as narrow as it was, what the likely outcome would have been if she had waited. She did not apologize. She did not perform remorse. She stated facts in the same quiet, level voice she used for everything, and she let the facts do the work. Then she placed a folder on the table. "My credentials," she said. "Medical degree from Georgetown, completed 2017. Surgical residency, completed 2019 through a DoD-affiliated program. Board certification in both emergency medicine and general surgery, current and in good standing. I have been working with the State Medical Board to reinstate my active license since arriving in this city 8 months ago. That process is ongoing due to the classified nature of portions of my service record. I have documentation of all of it. The room was very quiet. Glendon had stopped writing. Dr. Obi picked up the folder and opened it without any particular haste. She read for 2 minutes. She set it down. She looked at Fletcher Crane. Crane was looking at the folder with an expression Sable had seen before on men like him. Men who had built their authority on the assumption that people below them did not have the capacity to surprise them. The expression of someone recalculating. She's still not licensed to practice in this state, he said. Regardless of what that says, that's correct, Dr. Obi said. And that's a conversation we will have. But I want to be precise about what we're discussing. She folded her hands on the table. We are discussing a physician, a board-certified, credentialed physician who identified a life-threatening emergency, correctly diagnosed it, correctly treated it, and saved a patient's life while the attending surgeon was unreachable. She let that sit for a moment. I am also noting, for the record, that Dr. Crane was unreachable because he was not in the building. The on-call log indicates he checked in at 11:47. He was reached at 1:52. Would you like to address where you were during that time, Fletcher? Crane's jaw tightened. That's not relevant to this discussion. I think it might be, Dr. Obi said pleasantly, and looked down at her notes. Sable sat with her hands in her lap and said nothing. Outside the 6th-floor windows, Chicago was having a gray October morning, the lake somewhere out there behind the low clouds, the city going about its business. Martin Aldridge was in the ICU, stable. His daughter had arrived from Indianapolis at 6 in the morning and had been in his room since, and a nurse had seen her holding his hand while he slept. Sable knew this because Keith had texted her at 7:15. He's doing well. His daughter's here. Thought you should know. She hadn't answered yet. She would. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. Dr. Obi asked precise and uncomfortable questions. Crane answered some of them and deflected others, and the ones he deflected told their own story. Pruitt gave his account out clearly and completely and did not hedge. Glendon filled 12 pages of notes. At the end of it, Dr. Obi said, Mrs. Wen. Dr. Wen, I am not in a position to grant clinical privileges today. That process has to follow its course. But I am suspending your employment in the float pool pending that review, and I am beginning the expedited credentialings process effective this morning. Given your documentation, I don't anticipate it will take long. I'd also like to have a separate conversation with you about our needs in the emergency department. She looked at Crane. I would like to see you in my office at 2 o'clock, alone. Crane stood, straightened his jacket, and left without looking at Sable. In the hallway afterward, Pruitt fell into step beside her. For what it's worth, he said, I'll be telling anyone who asks exactly what happened last night. I know you will, she said. Thank you. Does it feel like a win? He asked. Even partially? She considered it, the credentialing, the expedited process, the job offer that had been tucked inside Dr. Obi's careful language, the fact that Martin Aldridge was upstairs, breathing, his daughter's hand in his. I don't think about it in those terms, she said. I just think about what needed doing. Pruitt nodded slowly, like he was filing that away. 3 weeks later, Dr. Sable Wen received her active medical license in the state of Illinois. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. She read it once. At the kitchen table of the apartment, she was still mostly unpacking, set it down next to her coffee cup, and looked out the window for a while. It had taken 6 years of service in places she couldn't fully name, 2 years of bureaucratic navigation that would have broken someone with less patience or less practice at enduring slow, grinding difficulty. 8 months of taking vitals and changing linens, and being looked through by people who held the door of the profession like it was theirs to open or close. She picked up her phone and called her mother, who was in Portland and who had known. Because mothers know that something had been weighing on her daughter for a very long time without being allowed to speak its name. It's done, Sable said. Her mother asked what she meant, and she told her, and there was a silence on the line that was not absence but fullness. The sound of someone absorbing something they had been waiting to hear and not allowing themselves to expect. Are you happy? Her mother asked. Sable thought about the trauma bay at 1:47 in the morning, the needle, the monitor climbing back toward something survivable. Martin Aldridge's thick, scared hands. I'm working on it, she said. Her mother laughed, which was the right response, and they talked for an hour. She started in the emergency department on a Thursday. She wore her white coat for the first time in 4 years, and when she put it on in the locker room, she stood in front of the mirror for a moment. The coat felt heavier than she remembered, and lighter at the same time. The weight of the credential, the lightness of finally not having to be invisible. Keith was on shift, and when he saw her in the hallway, he stopped walking and grinned like he'd been waiting for exactly this. "Look at you," he said. "Don't make it a thing," she said. "It's absolutely a thing," he said. Dr. Fletcher Crane was no longer chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Callaway Regional. That process had also taken 3 weeks and had involved conversations Sable was not party to, and a review of the on-call documentation, and a separate matter that had apparently been building for some time that the evening of Martin Aldridge's accident had simply made impossible to continue ignoring. He had been offered a transition arrangement. He had accepted it. His photograph still smiled from the lobby, but there was a facilities request pending for that as well. Martin Aldridge was discharged on a Wednesday, 2.5 weeks after the night. He came in on a gurney with a pressure of 60/40 and a heart that was being squeezed to death from the outside. He walked out the front entrance with his daughter on one side and a cane on the other, and he moved like a man who knew he had been close to something and intended to take nothing for granted anymore. He had asked, before leaving, who had saved his life in the trauma bay that night. The story was complicated to explain, so the nurse who answered him kept it simple. "A doctor who happened to be there," she said. Martin nodded like that made sense, like it was enough, like the universe had provided and the details of how were secondary. He wasn't wrong. There's a particular kind of person that institutions are not built to accommodate. Not the loud, difficult ones, not the ones who push back visibly and make their grievances known. Those people the system has categories for, responses to, ways of managing or removing. The ones institutions don't know what to do with are the quiet ones. The ones who know how to wait. The ones who understand that being unseen is not the same as being absent, and that the moment will come, eventually, when what you know matters more than what you're permitted to say you know. Sable Wen had been waiting for a long time, not passively, not in defeat. The way a surgeon waits between cases. Present, prepared, watching the room, knowing that when the doors open and the gurney comes through, there will be no time for warm-up and no margin for hesitation, and the only question that will matter is whether your hands remember what to do. Hers did. They always had.